Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Matt Leader.
And I'm Craig Dickinson. Today on the show, we are looking at Thor Ragnarok. As you guys know, Thor Love and Thunder is right around the corner. And so we figured now would be an excellent time to go back and look at Thor 3, essentially, as it's directed by Taika Waititi. And the new film is by Taika Waititi. So we can pretty much assume that we have kind of a primer for the new film based on this one. So, Matt, what are your thoughts, your overall thoughts on Thor Ragnarok?
Well, I got to say that Thor Ragnarok is one of my favorite Marvel films. I don't think that's a very controversial statement. I think it's a pretty beloved film for those who like the Marvel cinematic movies. And so for me, it was more of kind of like a question of like why? Like why does this kind of resonate so well with audiences? There were a couple things that it kind of popped out to me. First, I think there's actually quite a nice setup and payoff and balance between both kind of the silly and what we kind of come to expect from the superhero genre of films. I don't want to quite say serious, but kind of the superhero heroics, especially towards the end of the movie. But that's a big thing overall that I kind of noticed this time was there's quite a decent kind of call and response throughout the whole film. You have all these different characters, like Loki gets his moment in the sunshine towards the end, fighting and coming back to save the Asgardians, but he still does it with his own, kind of flair. You got Hulk, Bruce Banner, they have their moment. Hela, Heimdall, Tessa Thompson as the Valkyrie, like everyone kind of has their own little moment of like both like silliness and goofiness and funniness, but also with that heroics. And I just think that movie is like well balanced from that perspective of allowing the actors to shine and giving each of the people their own room to breathe within the film.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's funny in researching this film, I found that the Taika Waititi had actually, when he pitched Marvel on being able to do this film, that he wanted to make it kind of like Big Trouble in Little China, which I love that film. And that film also strikes several balances in between comedy, horror, action. It's all over the place. And but also it's successful in that. Like it doesn't, there's some films where what's the tone? I can't tell where this film's at. It hits all those things. And Ragnarok does too. It's a good point that it is easily one of the funniest movies, but it's also fairly dark in places, and it's earned in both of those things. You kind of need that levity. I mean, Thor loses an eye for crying out loud. Odin dies. Lots of people die in horrific ways, but you also have, these moments of just straight out comedy, like buddy comedy, kind of mixed in to kind of balance those things out. And I love the inclusion of the Hulk in this. My one gripe is that I wish I wouldn't have seen that in the trailer, because that reveal, like if someone had not seen it, because you really don't know who it's going to be. And then that door opens up and it's, the Incredible Hulk. And it's such a, if you could take that journey with Thor where he's like psyching himself up and then he has that relief, how much cooler would that have been to not have that spoiled? But it's a great film. I really enjoy it. It's also, I think, another thing that makes it a very popular film is that it really is kind of like a reboot of the series in a lot of ways, and of the character. Even in some very tangible ways, like he's got a new haircut and he loses his hammer. He's got the eye patch, loses the planet, so it like kind of resets a lot of things for Thor, and so it works, I think, like a really good entry point for a lot of people too.
So I was kind of curious because I know honestly, I do enjoy all three Thor movies. I think the second one's the weakest of the three. I think this is the best, but I think one holds up just fine on its own. I know you're a big fan of the first Thor movie. What are your thoughts on it? Essentially kind of being a soft reboot of the character. Did you like it? Did you not like it?
Yeah, it never bothered me. I mean, there are certain things, we'll get to this when we get to the music, but now it's a good time as any, that they even when Thor sits down in the chair at the end and kind of takes his rightful place as King of Asgard, they play his theme from the beginning of the first Thor movie when he's about to be crowned. And so it's it's a reboot in the sense that we've kind of started over for him, but not in the way that we've junked everything else. Like everything else matters. It's not like we're forgetting all those things and throwing them away. It is kind of a natural progression for him. And so, yeah, it didn't bother. It never bothered me. Oh no, he doesn't have his hammer, therefore this movie's horrible or what have you. It did feel like, yeah, this is a natural progression. It did get rid of some things that we wouldn't have thought, like when Asgard is destroyed. It's like, oh, I didn't see that coming. But it's also kind of a natural outcropping of the movie. I mean, it's called Ragnarok. It's supposed to be their apocalypse, and it happens.
Yeah, I do think that that's actually probably the most interesting, like for the whole movie, the ending, how Ragnarok actually does happen is the most interesting part because it's total, subversion of expectations. When you go into a superhero movie, you kind of expect them to defeat the bad guy, and they do. I forget the big fire creature's name. Who
Yes, Surtur.
Suitor or whatever.
Yeah,
He is defeated, but then they intentionally unleash him on Asgard, and I think that's it didn't strike me as much as it did this time how odd that is for them to basically blow up a planet on purpose. But that's how they defeat Hela. That's how they get out of the mess. So like I think that's also it's interesting from that perspective of it's a bit of a deconstruction of the character and like building something new, but it's also a bit of a deconstruction and kind of meta commentary on superhero films in general, where they're blowing up the character, they're blowing up the world, they're blowing up everything and kind of starting fresh. I will say the one thing that felt the worst to me was the fact that all of Thor's friends kind of get killed like immediately.
mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah,
they're basically, I mean, I can't even say they're glorified extras in the film. They're just extras.
yeah,
They die as easily as any of the other cannon fodder, right? And so coming from the other two Thor films where they have Lady Sif in particular has a little bit more to play, and you might say they're kind of B, maybe C characters. They get totally discarded.
yeah.
And that's the only part that feels kind of not rushed, but just that's the one part that I feel like they wiped away. And I'm like, oh, well, okay. Kind of getting rid of those characters, I guess.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I was going to ask about that later. I did have that question too. I mean, like Hogun actually puts up a fight and still dies pretty quickly, but the rest of them, I mean, Sif's not even in the movie. And then what you have Volstagg and can't remember the one that Zachary Levi plays.
Right.
But they die so yeah, Fandral. They're just gone. I mean, like maybe have them off planet. I don't know, somewhere else instead of killing them within 20 seconds. I mean, I guess you're trying to establish how much Hela is amazing and indestructible or whatever.
But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like they're just
Yeah.
like getting rid of them. It kind of feels like, that scene in Revenge of the Sith when Palpatine is fighting Mace Windu and there's like two other Jedi there. And the two other Jedi just like die instantly. It's like
Kit Fisto goes down.
Yeah, and it's just like nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear it. Yeah, I see that.
So I would say that's probably my biggest gripe with the film.
I guess Waititi didn't like those characters. So goodbye.
I guess not.
So what about cinematography? Did you have anything that jumped out to you in the cinematography field?
There's kind of two things. The biggest for me was the use of color and just like the overall color palette. And this is something that I have found kind of interesting where a lot of the Marvel films that are set on Earth are very washed out, very desaturated. They're not very vibrant films until Guardians of the Galaxy rolls around. And James Gunn kind of creates this film where it's almost technicolor, where there's a brightness and a vibrance. And this film really picks up and runs with that same palette. Where, in particular, once they get off Earth, the color palette is that same. Where Sakaar, the trash planet, is incredibly colorful.
Mm-hmm.
There's face paint, just the garbage, the debris around everything is so bright and colorful. And I think that's part of what makes the film pop a little bit, and why I think it stands out as one of the better Marvel films is that it has kind of an airiness, a lightness to it, just from that color that adds to the film quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's funny you even get that kind of. There's like a meta commentary on that too about the room being red and white. Just pick a color. Ridiculous. It's very much aware that it's being very. It looks like a comic book panel in a lot of ways. They had some interesting things. I thought I always enjoy seeing the Thor on the left and Surtur's on the right. That kind of stuff is always fun. And there's one point Surtur's face feels like 2/3 of the screen at the beginning. But there was a couple of great shots for scale that I really liked, and it was kind of repeated, which was interesting. Where you have at first, you have when Hela's up on the throne. I think it's one of the very first times she's on the far left, and she's like 50 feet above Scourge. It's just you get to see this massive room, and they show the shot, and they go back to Scourge's face, and then they go back to this wide shot again, and it's really impressive that you have her that much above him and that far away. And they do that again with the Grandmaster, but it's in a scene where lots of interesting things happening. This is right after the Hulk escapes, and you have Loki and Valkyrie walking through the hallway, and they're flanked by some Sakaarian warriors, and there's like a triangle happening as they're walking, which is always cool to see the way they've set that up. And then what happens is that the camera rotates like vertically, so you can see that actually what you're looking at is the reflection. The camera pulls over the top, and then you get to see this super wide shot. Grandmaster's way up on the left, Loki and Valkyrie down on the right in this huge room. It's kind of repeated that same thing that you had with Hela. But I was like, there are certain things where, the cinematography doesn't stand out. It's like it's just doing its job. It's very much just in service of the film. But there were a couple of these I was like, okay, wow, somebody's showing off. What's the message here? What are we trying to get? And, in both cases, I think you're getting just how much power both these characters have.
Sure. A couple other of my just favorite shots, kind of randomly off the top of my head. Right after Hela gets hit with the lightning bolt towards the end of the film, and Thor comes flying down, there's this kind of a great profile. It's like a side profile shot where you have Thor arcing down in lightning, and then all of the little minions, Hela's minions, like forming like a little pile and like reaching up. And there's this kind of nice diagonal balance, rule of thirds balance with Thor coming down and the minions coming up. And it reminded me of like Adam and God in the Sistine Chapel, like both reaching out, and it like you could freeze frame that and it'd be an awesome comic panel where it was like all this movement and action, and it's kind of slow motion, and you got Led Zeppelin in the background, and like that's a great little moment there. There are a couple interesting dolly shots too, where it's like the camera's on a track. One of them, when Thor is first meeting the Grandmaster, you have the Willy Wonka moment when he's in like the tunnel of light, and you got it sounds like a youngish kid talking, welcome to Sakaar and all that kind of stuff. And you have, I want to say, I don't know what the song is, but it's got the Willy Wonka music, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that it's like a dolly shot, except that Thor is static. So there's like movement around, and it's kind of like trippy. And obviously it's playing off of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, one of the creepiest scenes from that film as well. But there's that. You already mentioned it, but one of my favorite shots and moments in the film is when he's got like the spear, and he's hitting it on the ground, calling for Hela.
Yeah, that's another good one.
And there's a moment where there's a dolly shot, and you just get this sense of scale with the empty halls in Asgard, and you've got the one lone figure on the throne calling for his challenge. So there's a couple moments like that throughout the film. Oh, and this is also in the moment when Hela gets hit by the lightning bolt, and she says, like, "What are you the god of again, brother?" And Thor has this. I don't. It's not a flashback, right? Because he's seeing his father again, and they're having a new
Right.
conversation. So vision, perhaps. But Thor says to his father, "I'm not as strong as you." And his father turns to him and says, "No, you're stronger." And then there's another great dolly shot of kind of Thor, shrinking back down. And to me, that was going back to reality, right?
Mhm.
And kind of losing that vision, but also gaining more perspective as the shot got wider.
Yeah, that's great. I had that too. I didn't describe it nearly as well as you did, though, so I'm just going to leave that one. The last thing that I want, or actually two last things that I liked, is you have that extreme close up of Mjolnir broken after Hela destroys it, which I remember even seeing that in the trailer. It was like oh crap, because we've seen how indestructible this thing is. It just a great moment of characterization, right? Really, that you get to see just how powerful it is. Because we spent what 4 movies with Thor at this point already, a couple of his and a couple of Avengers movies, and then to see that happen, and then when you have, it's interesting. It's the shot you're describing with Thor seeing his dad. They do that an earlier time too when he's in the arena fighting Hulk, and Hulk's just pounding on his face before he kind of charges up. It's kind of like foreshadowing for later, right? I mean, it's very very much what it is. Is that when he does land the punch on Hulk, you get this extreme wide shot, and you kind of see this ripple effect of it, which it just so these very intentional super wide shots. You just get to see the fallout of all of this stuff, and there's just two little characters, but the power is you have to have room for this to show the power.
Definitely. So, was that kind of your last cinematography? You ready for some
Yeah,
music,
let's
sound?
talk about the music. Yeah.
So what are some of your thoughts?
So a couple of things. I always loved the Mjolnir sound as it's kind of flying around, and the kind of ping 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 as it's just taking out guys left and right. Electricity is always kind of a fun sound that they're making when Thor's kind of charging up, but the sound that really sticks out to me in this one is when Hela's headdress thing happens. It's almost like a knife's being pulled or being unsheathed. She's kind of gearing up to kill somebody. It's a really interesting sound, and she kind of does it a couple times. It's almost like a little overkill, just a little bit for me that she kind of goes back and forth that way. But every time she does, it's like things are about to get real.
Yeah, that's great. I love the Mjolnir sounds as well. I already mentioned Led Zeppelin,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a fantastic use of that song in there. And I don't think we get a lot of pop music, or as popular music, real life Earth music, in a lot of Marvel films outside of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it stands out as a little bit unusual for this film to use it twice, once in the very beginning, and then once again towards the end when he's fighting with Hela.
Yeah, and a great choice for just because of the song's awesome, but also the fact that it references Norse mythology. Like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, it's always been there. Like, of course, this would be a good theme song for Thor.
Yeah,
But yeah, a lot of diegetic music in this movie, though. You mentioned the Willy Wonka one. You also have Grandmaster's jam session. He's playing a little bit there, and then you hear it also like on his leisure vessel a couple times. So that's kind of fun. And I also did mention that the throne room scene. It's called A New King. It's Patrick Doyle's New
mm,
King that you hear at the beginning of the first Thor movie. He's about to be crowned, and then of course the frost giants show up. But it's not. It's kind of subtle. It's not super obvious that it happens, but if you're listening for it, I'm like, this sounds familiar. I looked it up. I'm like, yep, that's the same one. So they've kind of the arc that they started at the beginning of the first Thor, they've completed at the end of this film.
sure, and that's a great catch, and I think that's definitely. I did not catch that musical piece, but it's pretty obvious that's what they're going for in that moment, that he's finally, you know, a king, which it sounds like he may not be in Love and Thunder. So
Yeah,
we'll have to see.
have to see. But yeah, I mean, most of the, and it stands out to me too, because most of the score is pretty synthesizer heavy, right? It's Mark Mothersbaugh, from Devo originally. That's where most of us know him from, and has done, tons of animated stuff, Lego movies and whatnot. And then it fits with this one. It feels kind of like a video game in a lot of ways.
Yep, that's what I thought of. That
I mean,
it felt like 80s arcade music.
yeah. And which fits with, the arena and all of that stuff. And it kind of just adds to the fun of the movie.
Oh yeah, that, and it does fit really well with the color. Like it feels like a colorful arcade, arcade game.
Yeah, it's a nice mix. Do you have anything else to sound before we move on to performance? We kind of talked a lot about this stuff already.
Yeah, I think that's the big things I wanted to talk about. I kind of have already mentioned for sound, but as far as performance, what did you think?
I mean, I think it's solid all over. I don't think there's anybody that stands out as being poor. I think that Hela is fantastic. I mean, Kate Blanchett is just amazing as a villain. She's a great actress. Period. She's so different. It's fun to say for people that haven't seen it. Like, you've seen Lord of the Rings? Like, that's Galadriel. It's just like polar opposites, and completely convincing as both. And she's so good in everything that she's in. And she's evil for sure, but she's also strangely attractive, even though she's evil. So I think just a great character. She's a standout for me. And then, you have Jeff Goldblum in it, and he's just playing Jeff Goldblum, and that's always fun. But, Chris Hemsworth is hilarious. Like, that's the thing he didn't really get to do in the first two movies. And they're kind of just leaning into that a little bit more. And, his rapport with Tom Hiddleston is totally on point. So what about you? What did you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the acting is all on point. I think Hela is a great villain. I do think that she's a little overpowered, but like that's kind of what they were going for. So I'm kind of like, that's fine. That works. I think that Thor he really steals the show with both the comedic, melodrama that he has. The moment when he's screaming out of the color Willy Wonka tunnel, and then you also have the moment where he's sitting on the throne. So, like I said, that's where it's like that balance. You both have the melodrama comedy, but also very dramatic beats, throughout the whole thing. And I think that's pretty true for like all of them. I do enjoy the very small piece with Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange. Yeah. We haven't mentioned that yet. But that's like a fantastic, fun little scene, seeing Thor like completely out of place. And again, that speaks to the comedic timing that Hemsworth has and brings to the film. So like overall, I think like there's nothing to complain about with the performances. Did you have any favorite lines from the movie?
Oh my gosh, it's really hard to narrow it down. I mean, pretty much anything that Korg says, the whole thing's a circle, not a real circle, more like a freaky circle. And of course, that's exactly what Doug used to say. See you later, new Doug. So great.
The whole pamphlet joke about the revolution, fantastic.
Didn't print off enough pamphlets.
Yep. Nobody showed up except for my mom and her boyfriend, who I hate.
Right. Oh my gosh, so good. I also had the exchange between Thor and Hulk, because it's funny. You're like, Hulk and Banner are two different characters in this one. And you get to hear Hulk talk, which was a new thing for us when he says, we're the same, you and I, just a couple of hot-headed fools. Yeah, same. Hulk like fire, Thor like water. Kind of both like fire. But Hulk like real fire, Hulk like raging fire, Thor like smoldering fire. Won't even let him have that.
Yeah. I think that one of my favorite lines, or really kind of series, is his last talk, Thor's last talk with his father. and
Yeah.
kind of culminating in like that moment when he says like, "Are you Thor, the god of hammers?"
Mm,
You know, that hammer was there to channel your strength, and for me, that's kind of the apotheosis moment for him,
yeah.
where he like it clicks. And so that like that's always kind of a favorite of mine. But there's a lot of great comedy lines from everyone, and like you said, it's kind of hard to pick out just like one or two.
Yeah, I had that Odin line too. That like, when he says that, "Are you Thor, the god of hammers?" Like that's just like I'm ready to run through a brick wall line too. It's like, yes, of course that's not what I am. I'm, he's it just. Oh man, that rhetorical question is just brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that jumped out to me too that I've always liked the line too, where Bruce has to take over flying the ship, and Thor says, "You're a scientist. Use one of your PhDs." He says, "None of them are flying alien spaceships."
Yeah.
And yet he's really good at flying alien spaceships. So I don't know. It's funny in the moment though.
Yeah, it works. Um,
So I'll skip down to body language.
okay.
I really
Yeah.
liked Valkyrie's introduction because she comes off that ship and she's swaying, and at first you think she's being cocky, and it's actually that she's drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of a fun reveal. She's swaying back, and it's like, no, she just can't keep her balance.
Which
So that's kind of a
which
fun
is
little,
like set up for her story, which
yeah,
goes back to like what I was talking about with like the film is filled with really good like setup and payoff.
yeah.
There's like a little moment when with Jeff Goldblum as the Grandmaster, and
Mhm.
for the life of me, I didn't write it down, but there's this moment where he's saying this line to Loki and to Thor, and he doesn't finish the sentence. He just kind of pauses, and Loki and Thor are kind of looking at each other like, "What?" And like that's just like a great little moment of both like writing and that acting of like, yeah, the Grandmaster, he's just weird, like, and you can tell with Goldblum's like movements and his expressions that he's just a weird dude.
Yeah. God bless him. Speaking of him, another example of body language that I really liked is there's a moment where uh, Thor has kind of powered himself up, and he takes the hammer and it swings it at Hulk, and Hulk catches it.
Mm-hmm.
And you see there's this really what you get to see the size of this couch. This couch is so big. You see Loki and Grandmaster both in profile, both lean forward at
Yeah.
exactly the same moment. And then it cuts. This whole thing's great. Then it cuts to Thor, and you see Thor's face go from this nervous smile to just this, oh crap, what's about to happen? So the anticipation builds. You can just see it with both that body language and that facial expression. Just I love that moment so much. Things are about to change.
Yeah. Which is kind of a good segue into setting and design and props, because there's a number of props that are pretty important throughout the whole film. I think obviously you have Mjolnir. I love the fact that it is disguised as an umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the kind of prop for several jokes of Thor like reaching out for Mjolnir and it like not coming right away or hitting a ton of things as it comes. You have Scourge's assault rifles.
Yep.
Which is the most unexpected prop out of all of them. But again, it's like this is something that's just played for kind of a stupid joke at the beginning, and it ends up being the way that Scourge like redeems himself at the end, is using those assault rifles as he jumps off of the ship to save the Asgardians. So it's like, again, there's that moment of like, here's, a little sprinkling of something at the beginning, which is very easy to dismiss or write off as just like I said, just a, random joke, whatever. But then it actually plays like a larger part for that character later on.
Yeah, as he kind of redeems himself. Because
Right.
he's very much played as a joke at the beginning, him with the shake weight and all that other stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of jokes about his stuff.
His
And
stuff.
yeah, This stuff's actually fairly important. I love the refillable beer that,
Mm.
you mentioned that's the scene with Doctor Strange, which is just classic. The fake Infinity Gauntlet was a nice nod to, is that in Thor 1? I think it is.
I think so.
When they're going through the kind of the treasury there, and we see it, and it's, the wrong way. It's on the wrong hand. And so that was like, hey, that's they messed up, and they're like, no, 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 this was intentional the whole time. And then of course, then there's the Tesseract, and she makes a mention, oh, that's not bad. I love that hair cutting machine that
Oh
Stan Lee
yeah.
pulls out.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And a couple other things, the shock remote, which comes into play pretty. I mean, how else do you neutralize Thor? You got to have him like on a little mini taser thing, and then that big old melt stick
Oh
thing
right. Yeah.
is just hilarious.
And it looks so innocuous. Like,
Yeah,
and then totally unexpected. It melts someone completely.
yeah. And pardon you from life. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is filmed on sound stages, and that's kind of just what you would expect. I mean, they're not going to go to outer space and do these things, other than but it is filmed in Australia, which is fun for the most part, and Tamborine National Park, which I'm assuming is where you have the Norway scenes. I'm assuming, yeah, those are outside. That's most likely where that was filmed. And that's nice, just as a refreshing kind of break from what's happening when they get out of New York. And they go out in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of a break from what's going to happen, but also right before you get to hella, all hell literally breaking loose.
Yeah, and we've kind of touched on some of the other sets like before. Sakaar being so crazy, colorful. I think it's like a really inventive like setting. I'm not sure if that actually comes from the comics or not. But I do kind of love this idea of this kind of toxic waste pit on these different like location, like planes of the universe. I'm not sure if those are the right words within the MCU, but it's like this is where all the trash goes.
Right.
And, it's like, oh, and you've got these spaceships and there's this society, you got this time, like it's this whole little like mini adventure, but in the trash planet. So I just think that's like a very inventive way where a lot of Thor 1 is kind of placed on like random places on Earth. And Thor 2, you've got like, I want to say it's like Helheim and then like London, I think is the other location.
Yeah.
And so it's like, again, you're just using something that's very different, going to new locations, expanding the story from there.
Yeah, I had to look it up too. They actually go to what's the hell dimension? It's Muspelheim. I pardon my accent there, but that was also fun that we have that environment. That's where we start the film. We start in hell. Just kind of interesting. What does that say metaphorically? Oh no, Thor's in a cage. The great part. You think it's voiceover, and it's actually not. He's talking to a skeleton.
Talking to a skeleton.
Hulk has a giant skull for a bed. That's
Mm-hmm.
fun. Not sure what kind of creature that is. I'm sure someone knows. Please let us know if you're listening.
I love the gladiator armor and
Yeah.
weapons and stuff.
That's fun. Oh, I did have one other costume thing I wanted to bring up. I know this is out of order, but that's cool. When Valkyrie puts the uniform back on as a way to kind of reclaim her identity, it's played in that way, where she's, yep, I'm resuming who I was before. And so that's kind of a fun and very intentional costume change. So those are always cool to look for. Anything else setting design wise before we move on?
No, I think I talked about everything for that.
I wanted to mention, Scourge. We've talked. It seems like we have this kind of this theme going through with characters having not changed, but being revealed, right? Where he's a guy initially he meets Thor. And he's like, yeah, we fought together and all that stuff, and then he kind of gets sucked into the whole Hela thing, and then he reveals that he actually is brave. It's not development. I don't think it's much as a revert. He's reverting to who he'd been originally.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we talked about all the main characters. We get a little bit more for Heimdall to do in this film
Yeah,
than he had in previous ones, which is kind of interesting.
a little bit more just work to do for the character.
Yeah. I always forget that Idris Elba is even in this film because he has so little to do,
Yeah.
right? And he's like just covered in armor and he's got those weird contact lenses.
Hmm.
Doesn't do a whole lot. So I'm like, oh yeah, he's in these movies. And this one, I'm like, oh yeah, hey, Idris Elba's in this movie. We also have, of course, some random cameos, which is just played for laughs, where you have Sam Neill playing Odin. Matt Damon shows up as Loki, which
Yep.
just out of nowhere. And Chris's brother Luke plays the Thor actor, which is fun. And of course, you had some. I think my favorite moment of diegetic music is where you have the choir actually singing. You think it's not diegetic, but actually they're there.
Yeah.
And then camera cuts to them. And that's fun. Yeah. So I think that's it for characters.
Yeah, I think so.
We mentioned under world building, I just had it. It's really one of the most comic booky of the MCU. It feels like it's just ripped from the comics. Doesn't feel like it's trying to adapt art. I mean, there's nothing on Earth other than a brief scene with Strange and of course the Norway stuff. But it feels very outlandish. But I buy in.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the reason why I love it is the fact that it feels wacky and out there, but also very much like a comic book with the bright colors. It's also got like a lot of heart, like for such a goofy film. You have the moments when like Thor is like realizing who he is and like what he's supposed to be. And you have that really the same with like Scourge. You have the same with Valkyrie.
Yeah.
And Loki has this, I don't want to quite call it a turn, but it's like he's clearly trying to be better than he was. So like this is also one of the films where it's like Loki's on a bit of a redemption arc himself. I don't think he's there in this film, but he's definitely not like just pure evil.
True.
So it's like there's a lot of redemption going on throughout the whole film, which I think is like it's heartfelt and adds something that's missing. I think from some of the comic book movies that I don't like, and so that's like I appreciate that it's got the humor, it's got the comic book hero stuff I would expect to see, but it's also got that heart thrown in as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead, if you're good, head down to final thoughts, because that kind of bridges nicely with
Yeah,
with my thought. Like the theme of the film is, the Asgard's not a place, it's a people.
yes,
Learning to let go of what's not important, which I think there's kind of a meta thing with that too, where we're like, Thor doesn't have to have long hair, he doesn't have to be on the planet Asgard, he doesn't need his hammer, all of these things. And I think Lart, in the bigger, in the grand scheme, in like an actual life lesson, it really is about letting go and accepting your place in the world as Thor does.
So I think that it makes sense that this is, I think, one of the most popular Marvel films, that it's got those three legs to stand on for the film. You've got the humor, which I think works. You've got the normal Marvel action, which works. I mean, Suture coming and destroying Asgard, right, with the fire sword and the flame, and then you've got Hela shooting the needles up at him, and there's tons of action, and then you've got some nice thematic work as well. So it's like I don't know how much more you could ask from a film.
Yeah. I mean, this is one that really made me like Thor as a character. He's barely in the second Avengers movie, and I liked the first two Thor movies, okay, but this was the one where it's like I think he feels more relatable.
Yeah.
And of course, being funny is always something that's attractive and something that you want to latch onto and you want to see more of. And I think I think what we're hoping for Love and Thunder, that it's that we want to see more of that character. We want to see more of Korg. We want to see. It'll be interesting that there's no Loki. for him. That'll be an interesting thing to see if they deal with that. Well, of course, we also have the return of Jane Foster, and so that's a whole other thing. She's noticeably absent from this film,
and,
and so
and she's going to be Thor.
yeah,
Mighty Thor.
yeah.
And then I just saw some news today where it's only like 119 minutes.
Yeah, I saw that too.
It's like the shortest Marvel film in the last 5 years. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because like if you have a story that you want to tell and that's a 119-minute story, then like that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's Taika Waititi's second Thor movie. So the first one, maybe there was a learning curve, and maybe at this point it's just like I know exactly what I want to do, and
Yeah,
this is where it's at. So
that's what I'm hoping.
yep.
So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you would like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook, email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it really helps us get the word out about the podcast. And if you haven't yet, please join our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts and discuss all things related to movies.